everyone, my name is Jemima. I'm recovered from an eating disorder and I've found faith through the fight. Today I'm going to be talking about spiritual fasting after having an eating disorder. I think this is really important because it's rightly so not really spoken about in the eating disorder community because a lot of people are still recovering and that can be triggering for them, but it's also not really spoken about in church either. Most churches just tell people who have previously struggled with their relationship with food to avoid fasting altogether and to just fast something else other than food. But I have found that I've actually really wanted to start learning how to spiritually fast, as it is a spiritual discipline, so hopefully this video will help some people who want to do that. This is all stuff that I have learned from others, from mentors, from people who have actually experienced having an eating disorder and who now regularly spiritually fast, and just from revelations I've got from God through my fasting journey. I've actually only been fasting for about 4 or 5 months, so it's not been that long, but I have learned a lot, so maybe I'll do another video in a few months' time when I know more about it too. I just want to say that you are allowed to disagree with me, that's okay. But if you're not fully recovered yet, don't go hating on this video. You probably will be quite angry at this video, the fact that it exists, because you're not fully recovered yet and you're not ready to fast. That's totally okay. If someone had told me 4 or 5 months ago that I would be fasting right now, I would have got quite angry at you and felt quite offended because I just wasn't ready. Now, something that I always say and push is that regularly feeding and fueling your body is really important. And it is, especially if you are genetically prone to have a restrictive eating disorder. You don't want your body to go into energy deficit because you're restricting and not eating enough, because this can trigger a natural bodily response of wanting to restrict more, and therefore, hey presto, an eating disorder forms. And I do stand by this. I think it is so important to regularly fuel your body and look after it so that you are in peak condition and God can use you at your best for His glory. However, I do think that there is one exception for that, and that is spiritual fasting. So why do we need to fast? Well, in Matthew 6 verse 16, Jesus says when you fast, not if, but when you fast. This is used within the context of him also talking about prayer and giving as well. All those things together are expected by Jesus for his followers to be a normal practice. Fasting is not for particularly extreme or intense Christians who are super holy, it's for everyone. But if we don't fast, it's not a sin, as fasting is not a commandment. Fasting just helps us to get closer to God. It's abstaining from fleshly desires to go deeper in prayer with Him. And as a result, we often get spiritual sharpness, we get clarity, and it helps us to pray with more strategy and brings breakthrough. But if you're not ready to fast, then fasting is not going to bring you closer to God. It's going to pull you further away from Him. So there's no point in doing it. We normally say don't fast if you are under 18 because you're a child and your body is still growing. If you have a health problem, if you really want to fast and you have a health problem, go and speak to a doctor for advice. If you are pregnant, definitely don't fast. And if you're underweight. Now, I want to add to that because underweight is normally spoken about as in if you're under a healthy BMI, but I actually think that at this point, especially when you struggle with an eating disorder, underweight means not being yet at your set point weight. So don't fast if you're not yet at your set point weight, your body hasn't settled there yet. And also don't fast if you're a woman and you haven't got your period back. Also don't fast if you are still in recovery. Personally, I do not believe that there is a place for spiritual fasting within ED recovery. If you're not recovered yet, don't do it. If you're still getting disordered thoughts, if you're still thinking a lot about numbers and calories, if you're still worried and you know what your weight is, if you still have fear foods, if certain foods bring you fear or anxiety, if you're still applying food to a solution or using it as punishment to a problem, if you are giving food any sort of moral value, you're not ready to fast yet, you're not recovered yet. Trust me, you'll know when you're fully recovered. But even if you are all of these things, that still doesn't necessarily mean that you are ready to fast. If this video has been triggering for you in any way so far or makes you angry, you're probably not ready. You will know whether you're ready to fast because God will probably tell you. He might even give you lots of warning and time to get ready to fast. He definitely did that with me. I was terrified when he first introduced to me the concept of fasting, and about a month later he said I was ready and I felt quite safe. Still a little bit uncomfortable, but not afraid anymore. You might also be ready to fast if you're genuinely excited by it and just want to do it all for God's glory and not for your glory. Don't be demoralized if you're not ready to fast yet. It's totally okay. It's not just about whether you're ready from after your ED. Fasting is also about spiritual maturity. You might not be spiritually ready yet, and that's okay. So if I can't fast, will I miss out? Well, in Mark 9:29, after casting out a demon from somebody, Jesus says this kind can only come out through prayer and fasting. I do believe that things can happen as a result of fasting that wouldn't have been released otherwise. But I also don't believe that God will withhold something from you that He wants to give you and you are ready for just because you can't fast. He knows you and He is gracious and understanding. The biblical definition of fasting is abstaining from food, but in the 21st century we have lots of addictions that we didn't have back then and lots of things that we rely on almost as much as we rely on food. God might want you to fast something else that you're ready for, and that could be incredibly powerful. Also, do note that others can actually fast for you in certain situations, so if you feel like there needs to be some sort of fasting happening for breakthrough or clarity on something, then other people can fast for you too. And I do just want to say that you are in no way a worse Christian because you can't fast. Fasting, it can be an expression of love and obedience to God, but you don't love God any less and you aren't any less obedient for God just because you can't give up food for Him. God is a Father who sympathizes with our weaknesses. By not fasting because you're not ready to fast, God is not disappointed in you. God doesn't love you any less. Let's take, for example, people who have previously struggled with an addiction to alcohol. God doesn't love them any less just because they have to choose the non-alcoholic option in communion for wine at church. It's the same sort of concept. So at this point in the video, I want to say that if you don't think you're spiritually ready to fast yet, or this video so far has been triggering for you or angering for you or started any disordered thoughts, then this is your cue to leave this video. That's okay, don't feel disheartened. This is just not for you just yet. And if at any point during this video you do start to feel those things or get really disordered thought patterns, then do leave this video and come back when you're a little bit more ready. So why does spiritual fasting feel so wrong once we've had an eating disorder? Well, it goes against absolutely everything that we are told in recovery. But recovery is about getting out of an ED mindset. An eating disorder is a mental illness, not a physical one. So as long as your intentions and mindset are in the right place during a spiritual fast, then it is okay. It might feel wrong, but it's okay. Fasting in general has a very bad reputation due to diet culture, but we know that dieting and restricting food to lose weight doesn't actually work, and thankfully the purpose of a spiritual fast has nothing to do with weight loss. Modern culture has also confused fasting with mortification. Fasting always comes alongside prayer and worship. You will never see a time of fasting in the Bible that then doesn't also have prayer and or worship attached to it. Fasting without prayer and worship is starving yourself. See, where spiritual fasting isn't bad or wrong, starving yourself is. That's the difference. It's also totally okay to be nervous and uncomfortable. Most people are anyway when they first start out fasting, whether they've experienced a bad relationship with food or not. God is stretching you and He's teaching you new things, which is hard but is going to be rewarding in the long run. We don't have to be scared though or afraid. We have nothing to fear. We are safe with God and we can give those fears over to God. Most people will probably have a big fear of spiritual fasting because their DNA is still the same. They may be recovered, but the fear of restriction is there because you might fear that if I restrict my food, I'll trigger my genes again and therefore will develop my ED back again. But there are things we can do to stop this from happening. For example, some really practical tips to make sure you're fasting your time, not your calories, have an extra meal at the end of the day. Have like 2 dinners if you're fasting 1 meal, for example, so that you still get your calories in. Or completely drink your calories. Have protein shakes, make sure you're getting your nutrients in. Have juice and smoothies and things like that. I've tried all of these and they work really, really well. But I do also just want to say that we have a God who can do anything, which is amazing. So if God wants to, He can change your DNA. He actually showed me that He changed mine, which is incredible. Now He might not change yours, but you can ask. It's also important to note that spiritual fasting doesn't always follow physical rules. We see times in the Bible, for example, with Moses and Elijah, where they went on fasts which shouldn't have been physically possible. They were supernatural fasts, and God enabled them to do this. If God can do that with them, He can do it with you, and He can protect your body for fasting for one meal or one day. So let's actually get down to the actual fasting. Before a fast, what are some tips and things that you should maybe do before a fast? Well, the first thing I would say is get a mentor or an accountability partner. This should preferably be someone who has had an ED and is definitely fully recovered, and should definitely be someone who is very experienced in fasting. It should be someone who has a good spiritual maturity and discernment and is wise. Make sure that they are okay with you chatting to them and asking questions before, during, and after the fast. They can pray with you, and they can help you to discern what God is actually asking you to fast and what He isn't. It's also important to agree with them that there is absolutely no shame in ending your fast early. Also, I would say to agree what you're going to eat after your fast, because this can often be where things go slightly wrong and can get a bit stressful. Now, in Matthew 6, Jesus says to not make it obvious that you are fasting. Now, before this, He also talks about giving and praying. They're all talked about in the same context. He says very similar things about those as well. But when we give and when we pray, we don't always do both those things in complete secrecy. We do them with others as well. So fasting is totally okay to not do in complete secrecy. I think that especially after having an eating disorder, it shouldn't be done in complete secrecy, because that is where the enemy will get in and will try to bombard you with ED thoughts. Jesus, when He said this, was actually mainly speaking to the Pharisees at the time, whose reasons for fasting were about personal pride. They were making themselves look bad to say, look at me, aren't I so great? Aren't I so spiritual and religious because I'm fasting? So in saying this, Jesus was actually saying that what's more important is where your heart is when you're fasting, saying that it's not about me and it's about God. So as long as your heart's in the right place, telling people is totally okay, and I definitely recommend it for accountability. The next thing you should do before a fast is check your intentions. The reason why you should be fasting is to draw closer to God and glorify Him. He might even give you a secondary thing to fast for example, breakthrough or clarity or spiritual sharpness, or just to have great experiences with Him. But you need to be thinking, am I having eating disorder thoughts about compensating? Am I having binging thoughts? Am I having weight loss thoughts or anything else eating disorder related? If so, don't fast and work those things through first with your mentor. There is great healing that can come out of this. The next thing that you'll need to do is choose a fast. Now, this can be quite overwhelming when you've previously struggled with an eating disorder, but that's okay. It's not necessarily about getting the right one. It's about having the right heart behind it. God doesn't mind. He just loves your heart. Now, God might give you a specific fast to do, and that's absolutely great and makes your job a lot easier. It's really important that you don't obsess over what you should eat and drink really specifically. God can be specific, but we don't want to become religious or legalistic. That's what an ED is. And God definitely isn't. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So start slow. Maybe fast one meal, then talk to your mentor about maybe trying something else when you feel more comfortable. Now, there are different examples of fasts in the Bible. God might ask you to do one of these, or it might be something else. There's the dry fast or the absolute fast, which is when they had no food and no water. For example, Moses did this for 40 days. That was a supernatural fast. And Esther did this for 3 days. She called a corporate 3-day fast of no food and no water. Now, these are only to be done when led by God, so it's really important that we know that it's God who's telling us to do this. And it's usually for a spiritual emergency or for extreme cases. This is never normally recommended to be done for more than 3 days, and if you've previously experienced an eating disorder, I would be very careful about completing this fast. Another type of fast in the Bible is the food fast or the normal fast, and this is where you just fast food and you have water or liquids for a certain amount of time. And the other one is a partial fast, which is more like a restriction of diet. For example, the Daniel fast, where he just ate vegetables and water and very, very specific foods for a period of time. There are lots of different examples of this in the Bible. Personally, I've actually found that this has been harder than doing a full food fast because it feels more restrictive. You're saying, I can't have this group, I can't have this group, but do find what works. I would always recommend to start off slow and small with fasts, and then slowly increase what you're doing when you feel ready and when you feel that God is telling you to do it. I don't necessarily think that elongated and longer periods of fasting are good for people who have had an eating disorder. But if God is telling you to do it and you are experienced and you know what you're doing, God will protect you. So go for it, but make sure that it's under the advice of a mentor and you've had lots of experience of fasting before this. Basically, when choosing a fast, talking to your mentor is key. Obviously, I would say go to God as your first point of call, but sometimes previous knowledge and previous ET thoughts can get in the way of what you're actually hearing from God. So it's good to go to God and then go to your mentor who can help you to discern those things, because wisdom, discernment, and spiritual maturity are really important when doing this. Something I'd say is really important not to do before you fast is to binge or eat an abnormally large amount of food ahead of a fast. You might be worried about feeling hungry, but stocking up on food doesn't work. It only actually stretches your stomach so that you will be more hungry later on or the next day. If you do feel the urge to binge beforehand, that's okay. There's some sort of fear going on here, so ask God what that is. Chat to your mentor about it and deal with the root of this. This might be a sign that you're not ready to fast yet, or it might just be an opportunity for God to heal you. Fasting is about taking a step of faith. It will be scary at first, it will, and that's okay. You'll be reliving physical sensations that have had bad connotations previously. But God can use this opportunity to rewire those physical sensations to give glory to Him, to be God-centered and not self-centered. Something else that would be good to do before you fast is to just ask God for the gift of wisdom if you don't have it already, or ask for more, because wisdom is really important when you're fasting. And if you have chosen to fast regularly, for example, one meal every week, then I would advise you to ask God every time before you fast whether you should fast that week or not, because there may be a good reason why you shouldn't or why you should. Just one more thing to add on this. It can get really muddled inside your head when you're trying to choose a fast, because God might be saying one thing and then what you're hearing can become distorted, because we have lots of previous knowledge about what fasts do to your body physically, as in weight loss wise. The important thing is that we remember that fasting is nothing to do with weight loss. But even if we do lose weight in the short term, we won't lose it in the long term, because our body will go into starvation mode, and then when we finally start eating properly again, it will put all the weight back on and probably a little bit more, and then we'll go back down to our set point weight where it's supposed to be. We actually see in the Bible when Daniel did his partial fast, by restricting his diet, him and his friends actually gained weight on the fast, which is incredible. Okay, so what about during a fast? What if I mess up during my fast? You will mess up, but that's okay. God is gracious and you are learning. Don't rely on any coping mechanisms that you used during your eating disorder. Don't punish yourself in any way or make your fast harder for yourself because you feel like you've mucked up. Just be honest with God, go back in and try again. Don't give up and don't come under condemnation. Making mistakes is absolutely fine for anyone who's learning to fast, even more so with an eating disorder. I haven't even been fasting that long and I have failed a lot of fasts, but every time I've asked myself, why did you mess up? Was there a fear rooted there that you need to work through with Him? Do you need more accountability at the moment? And there is always healing and learning to be found in that. What if you are mid-fast and you're doing fine and then disordered thoughts start to creep in and latch on to your fast? If food has been a problem for you, then fasting will probably be even more powerful when done with God at the forefront, which is amazing. But the first few times you do it, the enemy will just throw lies at you. So be prepared. It doesn't mean you have to give up. The enemy is just trying to make you feel afraid, and you have to choose not to partner with the lies and not to agree with them. It doesn't mean that your ET is back or is winning just because the enemy throws a lie at you. He's going to hate that you are fasting for the right reasons. So throw the truth back at him. Have pre-prepared Bible verses that you can throw back at him. And actually start doing it before he even throws them at you. Lots of people will experience one or two intrusive thoughts and then think, oh, that's it, I can never fast. That's it, I'm done. You will have intrusive thoughts. The enemy will throw lies at you. So don't give up at the first hurdle, and don't tell yourself that you'll never be able to fast because you've had a few intrusive thoughts. But if those thoughts do become all that you're thinking about and become the forefront of your fast and you've lost God in it, then do be wise and stop. Talk to your mentor about this. Eating disorders are religious and legalistic. Spiritual fasts are disciplined. There's a difference. If your disordered thoughts won't go away, God might actually tell you, or you might need to make the decision to either stop the fast or eat in the middle of a fast. And that's okay. Sometimes we will actually need to eat in order to strip down any religiousness or any control or legalistic thoughts that we have accidentally let creep into and latch onto our fast. At those times, it can be even more powerful to eat than not to eat. In fact, where an ED has previously been all about control and rules, breaking those rules might be exactly what you need to do in order to give the enemy a kick in the face. What about hunger pangs during fast? These can be hard. If I ignore them, am I just letting the ED win? Well, no, you're not. Also, you shouldn't have an eating disorder anyway. You should be recovered, otherwise don't fast. Yes, honouring your hunger is good. It's good to fuel yourself, but we also shouldn't be a slave to our stomachs. When we're fasting for God, ignoring hunger pangs is for the sake of God, not for the sake of weight loss. It's letting God have control over your stomach, not letting the ED have control over your stomach. There's a difference. If the line does become blurred or switches to the other side, stop and talk to your mentor. Now, the feeling of being hungry can be really scary at first because we've trained ourselves to think that hunger is bad, but hunger is not bad. Hunger just means that we should eat. Previously, when you had an eating disorder, the feeling of physically fasting in your body will have felt wrong in every way. In your body, in your flesh, in your mind, in your soul, and in your spirit. Whereas the feeling of spiritual fasting will probably feel wrong in your flesh, but it will feel right in your spirit, and that's the difference. What if I get the urge to binge whilst I'm fasting? We might, when we have an eating disorder, binge after or during physical starvation because we don't know when the next meal is. It can be overwhelming and you feel incredibly out of control. Normally, before a binge or during or both, your heart is racing and there's some sort of fear attached to what's going on. What if I fail my restriction plan or my fast and eat something? Or I can't eat for ages, so I have to eat loads now. My advice, if you're starting to get these thoughts, is eat something. Then ask God what your fear was and ask Him to work that through with you. When you're binging, you feel very out of control. So instead of trying to take back the control yourself, give God all the control. God has so much grace for you and He wants to help you. I would also recommend not using any methods to get yourself through the fast that you used during your eating disorder. For example, drinking loads and loads of water or chewing gum or whatever it is for you, because every eating disorder is different and people experience and use different coping mechanisms. Maybe God will later on, when you're more experienced at fasting, want to work with you and heal those. He's definitely started to do that with me, but at first I would just say stay away from them because you don't want to make fasting any harder than it already is. I would also recommend, whilst you're fasting, plan to do it on a day where you're also doing something that is God-centered. It helps you just keep your mind on God, which is the purpose of the spiritual fast. Maybe also do it with other people. Do it during a church service or whilst you're worshipping with your friends. Don't just go and pray by yourself for the first time because that's when the enemy might start to get at you. Remember that we don't want to give the enemy any wiggle room here. And the last thing I would recommend during your fast is just write down everything. Write down your testimony. Spiritual fasting is amazing. Yes, it's hard in some way and it's definitely really hard at first once you've had an eating disorder. However, there's so much testimony that can come from it. There's breakthrough. God will show you things. He will speak to you in new ways. There will be fruit from it and it will be something that you'll want to remember. So do write those things down and also write down where you've messed up as well because you can learn from them. And finally, what should you do after a fast? Well, here's just a few tips I think might be useful. Firstly, eat regularly and normally. You should have hopefully agreed how you're going to do that a bit more practically and specifically with your mentor before you start your fast. Secondly, don't engage with any ED behaviours afterwards. For example, checking your weight or doing excessive exercise. We're not in that place anymore. God is our new coping mechanism, not an eating disorder. Personally, I have found that my intrusive thoughts are worse the day after I finish a fast, which is really interesting. The enemy just starts to get at me because I've actually finished the fast. But I would recommend for the day afterwards to be prepared with your biblical truths and get ready to let worship be your warfare. You might even want to schedule a meeting or a chat with your mentor or plan to do something to keep your mind off it. Now, obviously in this video, I haven't really spoken a lot about why we fast. I just kind of touched on that and the biblical reasons for it. So if you want to know more about that, dive into that more, then there are a couple of links below that might help you with that. And there's a really good teaching on it from Prayer Storm and a book as well called God's Chosen Fast, which I highly recommend. And I just want to end by saying that fasting is powerful. If you've previously struggled with physical fasting and the enemy has taken it and used it for evil, when we let God help us restore it for good, and we do it safely and wisely, it can be even more powerful than those fasting who have never had a bad relationship with food. But remember that whilst you're trying to figure out fasting and you're learning and you're discovering and you're growing, God is gracious. He is forgiving. He knows you and he loves you no matter what.